Well, hello, everybody out there in Internet land. My name is Brian Trippett. I am known as the Front Porch Conservative. This is Chattin On The Porch, a little conversation show where we talk about items in the news. Sometimes it is solely your host. Sometimes I have a guest, and tonight I have one of the best guests that you can possibly get. We are on YouTube, we are on Rumble, we are on Twitter. So if you haven't done it yet, send out a tweet, a getter, a gab, a truth social. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, come on in, sit down, because we got a lot of very interesting and meaty subjects to talk about. Again, this is Chattin' on the Porch. My name is Brian Trippett, the Front Porch Conservative. I am sometimes known as the Beau and the Chapeau. Sometimes I go by the title, the Fine Fella in the Fedora, but above all else, I am your host. Again, we are on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we are on Twitter. So thank you guys for stopping in. This is going to be a really fun evening as I have an old friend coming back who is probably one of the smartest cats out there coming or going. And I always enjoy getting into a conversation with him about all things going on in the world. So we're going to give everybody a second or two to settle into the room. We got a quite the crowd forming up on Rumble. You Rumblers over there, TBAs are in the house. Hello, Fedora Nation. Indeed, hello, Fedora Nation. Now, if you're not a member of my channel, subscribe on YouTube and Rumble. I'd greatly appreciate it. Good evening, good evening, good evening, young lady, and good evening to the 199. Glad to have you all here. Oh, goodness. Let me settle in and we'll get this thing started. A while back, I came across a young man who, it didn't take me very long to figure out, has probably one of the finest minds that I've come across in a very long time. I've always appreciated intelligence. And when you can couple that with the ability to articulate what you think through the spoken word, okay, yeah, you definitely have got my attention. And in the times that we have interacted, either here on my channel or in other live streams or wherever we be on the internet, I have found him to be an invaluable resource. And if nothing else, a good friend and a great encouragement. He is the host of his own social media channel, Pensive Politics on YouTube. He is an absolute joy to listen to. If you've never had the occasion to hear what he has to say, folks, I can assure you tonight, you are in for an absolute treat. Please welcome back to the Electronic Front Porch, probably one of the best commentators on social media today, and my friend, Mr. Christian Watson. Professor,
Hello.
how you doing tonight, my friend?
Your introductions are so kind, though I know you are a genuine person and you mean them from the heart, but I have a hard time taking compliments. But for what it's worth, those were very kind words, and I'm more than grateful for your approbation.
Well, I appreciate that. And then let me tell you something. You know, the ability to take a compliment as you get older, that will change because you'll realize you'll get fewer and fewer of them. So appreciate them while you're getting them at this point in your life.
All right. Well, that's certainly a wake up call. That's certainly a wake up call.
I'm just kidding, man. How are you doing? I haven't talked to you in a while.
I'm all right. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. No, I'm just chugging along. I'm just trying to make sense of the chaos going on in our country right now.
Oy
I'm
vey.
trying to, yeah, no, there's been a lot going on. No, see, so I've been politically observant since I was like since I was like 12. I think my first election was the 2011 Republican primary election where there was Newt Gingrich and Ron Paul and Rick Santorum and John Huntsman and all of them. I was very much involved in looking at that as much as an 11, 12-year-old could be. I didn't really understand a lot of the significance of it. But I tell you, when I was glued to the media, I was glued to the media 100%. And then I also remember, of course, 2016. 2016 actually seems more of a distant memory than 2011 does, interestingly enough, because I remember after 2016, the kind of headlines I would see, the kind of mentalities I would see, the kind of thinking I would see, the kind of conversations I would see just drastically changed. Something happened. A few things happened, actually. The first thing that happened is that barriers, both in the minds of political observers and in the structure of the political system, were immediately torn down. because Donald Trump was the avatar of a revolution of the political system. But when you tear down barriers, what happens? The status quo is disrupted, and you have several different forces conspiring together to produce a new sort of Overton window type environment. And that's the period I think we've actually been in since 2016. We've been in this period of intellectual turmoil, of tension, where we've just been clashing, these clash of ideas, this clash of factionalism within right-leaning factions to decide what is the right going to actually do. Is the right going to be about being the sort of 1980s Reaganite open immigration type party where the free market ideology is prominent? Is the right going to be about being more populist in America first? Are those two visions mutually exclusive, or are they the same, or are they compatible? Are we going to worry about countries across the world with Israel, or are we going to worry about our own soil? Are those two visions incompatible? Are they mutually exclusive? So then you have all this stuff coming along, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well. You would not have seen the same kind of conversation we're having in 2024 about politics back in 2011.
Agreed.
2011. In 2011, what was the Romney-Ryan campaign's attack line against Obama? We built that. Remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was the attack line. And yeah, go on.
I was going to say, if ever there was such a thing as the culmination of what I would call establishment Republican politics, it was the Romney-Ryan campaign, because talk about the ultimate form of milquetoast.
Oh, yes.
That's really what that, I mean, I'm sorry. I come from a tradition that says, okay, give me a vivid, colorful contrast. I think it was Goldwater who came up with the term. Don't give me pale pastels. Give me bright colors.
Yes.
And I watched Romney, and it's like, I'm a fear. I mean, what was the term he used? Not radical conservative, but I'm a extreme conservative or something like that. And I'm sitting there going, buddy, I have seen Reagan. I've studied Goldwater. I know what conservative is. And brother, not in a million years. I know who your daddy was. It was George Romney. You represent a wing of the Republican Party that's been around for 50 or 60 years. And it boggles the mind. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for all that can be said of Donald Trump, and Lord knows he's been commentated about on the left and right now for the better part of a decade. You talk about the ultimate form of a bull in a china shop. He really, I mean, I love the way you phrase it, intellectual turmoil, because he has forced the conversation to a point where we're getting down and actually talking about basic fundamental assumptions of the way our government operates and has operated for the past 50 or 60 years. Whereas, someone says, well, Mr. President, we need to do this, this, and this. Trump's like, why? I mean, I love the beautiful yet powerful simplicity of that question he asks. Why are we doing it this way? Because really, if you want to get right down to it, and I'd love to get your take on this. For 40 or 50 years, you can make an argument we've been on autopilot as far as how we govern the country. Congress comes in, they pass a budget or they pass a continuing resolution. Nobody really reads it. They get angry after the fact they've passed it. Oh my gosh, both sides get to, jump up and down on their soapbox and say, well, we're going to change this, yada, yada, yada. And they don't do a thing and just keep right on doing it. And it boggles the mind. It really does.
Yeah, let me address a few things. Let me first address the Romney question, then let me address the Trump phenomenon. So the Romney question, and I have a gripe over this. I have a gripe over this because I want us to actually zoom out and look at 2012 as an election in terms of the social dynamics that surrounded it.
Sure.
Look at statistics. Social media only became incredibly prominent in politics around 2016. Now, of course, people that would want to dispute that idea will say, what about Obama Girl? Or what about the Obama Phone Lady? Okay, those were two nascent examples of what was an emerging phenomenon in American society. But Obama Girl and Obama Phone Lady or whatever, they were isolated examples. I don't really think you saw something of the similar extreme with the Romney campaign. You didn't really see anything like that until, again, 2016. Those were nascent examples of perhaps very intelligent political operators using a rudimentary form of technology to reach people. But that's not what really brought Obama into office. What brought Obama into office was his image as the so-called first black president and the sort of freshness that aesthetic provided. Now, because people need to understand that 2008 was an emotional election. I strictly remember being a young boy standing in my church. It was a black church at the time, and we were standing around a small TV with little antennas. This is almost kind of like an alien technology today. And we were waiting for the results that night to come in. I had no idea what was going on. All I knew was that a black man was running, and it was important for us to support him because he was fresh. It was politics done by aesthetics. And people don't realize how important aesthetics has become to so many people's political considerations, and then how also devastating it is to proper political understanding. When you look at aesthetics, when you say, for example, that optics is a very important thing for a campaign. Well, while that may be true in a more practical sense, what you're actually saying is that on the hierarchy of values, optics has the ability to invalidate every other political and ethical consideration that should come with looking at a candidate's policies. So, for example, Howard Dean, you remember this when he yelled?
Yeah.
That entire thing killed his campaign. It was a yell. It was something that many people do when they get excited. And for being a human, for seeming human, he lost the ability to be president. Now, Howard Dean is someone I don't support in the first place. I'm happy to become president. But for that reason, oh my gosh. Then you go overhead to Romney. Now, Romney, his problem was a problem manufactured by the media that he did not actually help. It was the problem of him being unrelatable because of how rich he was. The implication of that was that if you are a wealthy businessman, you are somehow unrelatable to most Americans, and therefore you are not good for the presidency. How absurd does that claim sound? My ability to achieve should not be a mark against me. It should be a mark for me if I'm trying to get into a position of high influence and power, such as the presidency. And yet Romney ran away from his achievements and tried to duck because his consultants and those who value politics on the level of aesthetics told him to. There are some political truths that are not truths. They are habits. And the difference between truth and a habit is the substance it carries when it is held under scrutiny. If you smoke tobacco your whole life, that does not mean you manage to survive. That does not mean smoking tobacco is healthy. Because I can demonstrate to you, for a vast majority of people, it actually destroys your lungs. But it's a habit. And some folks may say, well, because I didn't get lung cancer from smoking tobacco, it must be safe. No, you can't translate habits into truth if you can't replicate this. Science understands this principle of replicability, which defines the validity for so many different studies. If you can't replicate a study with a specific methodology with certain control groups, the study is deemed to at least be, at the very least, questionable. So Romney had that problem, the aesthetics problem, the cowardice problem. But he also had the problem, and I'll just be very honest with you, he also had the problem of lacking charisma. He lacked charisma on a fundamental level. Now, if you're going to try to lead anything, as I mentioned, aesthetics unfortunately plays a big part into this. You have to have some semblance of charisma. You have to have some way to inspire people. But the problem is, there are folks who have charisma who weaponize it against people. They inspire them towards the wrong ends. So I want to kind of evolve away from this culture of political, I call it the culture of political gamemanship, where we assess people on their charisma and their aesthetics and what things seem like and what the media is saying things seem like, rather than we do on the substance of their achievements. Vivek Ramaswamy was just called. He did an interview with Ann Coulter. Now, I did not watch the full thing, but I watched the clip. And in that interview, Ann Coulter said, "Your ideas are great, but the reason I would never vote for you is because you're Indian." What? He said that exact thing. Oh, I promise you, that exact. Not even paraphrasing. Because you're Indian.
Keep talking. I'm still listening.
Because you can find it out. Because you're Indian. Indian?
Oh my word!
That is perhaps one of the more blatant forms of aesthetics overtaking political consideration that I've seen recently.
I'll just go with blatant racism. That's just
racist. Yes, but the foundation of that sensibility 100% comes from this notion that appearances matter more than substance. And until we as a culture, as Americans, can get over that, until we can break what I call the curse of status-bound thinking, we're going to continue to be trapped in this epistemically inferior rut. We cannot see beyond our own personal tastes. Now, I can go on about this topic. I can go on. I don't want to do it, though. I don't want to do it because I don't want to take us off track.
Yeah.
We've already been on for 14 minutes. But because I can preach, I can.
I know that, brother.
I don't want to do that. So, the Trump phenomenon. I'll answer this briefly because I know we might have a video to play. I don't know, but if you can find it, but it's absurd. The Trump phenomenon. I think the biggest mistake people make when it comes to Trump is attaching a political label or ideology to him. Right? People say he is far right. People say he is populist. People say all kinds of things about Trump. I find them to be patently insubstantial compared to what he actually represents to America. Compared to what he actually represents to America, he was an iconoclast. I said this to Sebastian Gorka once. Said your boss was an iconoclast that quite literally defied the rules of certain ideologies that are expected to take place when a president who professes them take place. If you're a Democratic president, you're expected to push for universal health care and gay rights. If you're a Republican president, you're expected to push for traditional marriage and military funding. Well, Trump kind of just defied all of that and pushed for so many different things, so much so that it had so many different camps trying to claim him as their own. And so now what you've gotten is you've got several different perceptions because there's a lack of wisdom. Right? Whenever you have a lack of knowledge and you have the presence of ignorance, you will have 7 different opinions. This is the Platonic idea. This is what Plato would say. So one of the perceptions that we are seeing here is the perception of the fact that some people believe that Trump's a nationalist. Okay, well, what is a nationalist? What does that term mean? That term, over the course of the 20th century, has grown and metastasized into having different meanings. Over the course of the 20th century, the term nationalist has meant everything from, well, you supporting a totalizing view of the state, having dominion over the community, having dominion over the individual, and the entire nation, and the nation, the individual, the history of the nation, all being subsumed into the state. This is the idea of Il Duce. This was Mussolini's Italy. The entire idea was that the state was a totalizing force, an all-encompassing force that encompassed every aspect of life. In fact, if you look at the doctrine of fascism written up by Giovanni Gentili, you will very clearly see in the first few pages that he says, and Gentili was this philosopher who was the right-hand man of Mussolini. He wrote Mussolini's works for him. So the mouth of Gentili is the mouth of Mussolini. People don't get that, but that's what the case is. And so in the doctrine of fascism, he quite literally says this individualism that comes from the 18th century liberalism, he's talking about Americanism, classical liberalism, is actually bad in the man, that the man is a part of the nation and the community, and he is only estimable to the extent that he's a part of the nation and the community. So you have this totalizing idea. That was nationalism. Then you have the German idea where the nationalism is about the Aryan race, the ascension thereof, and the ascension of the German people. The sort of Volk, they call it, the sort of idea of the Volk, the Volkish notion of the German people that has this sort of historical transcendence. That was also nationalism. But when you get to a more American sense of what nationalism is, nationalism was the policy America had prior to the establishment of the League of Nations. And then a little bit after that, prior to the post-war consensus of the 1940s, America was under a regime of nationalism. You don't believe me? Then why was Robert Taft so successful in pushing back against America's admittance into the League of Nations? Why was I think Wilson even opposed it. The entire American people back then opposed it because the League of Nations was sure to bind the American citizen to the will and jurisdiction of bodies that were thousands of miles away. Well, the rejection of that, the mass rejection of that, was nationalism. Nationalism, defined in that sense, was maintaining the notion that the sovereignty of your nation is indispensable to the existence of your nation, and then you preserve it on that basis. So if Trump is a nationalist in that sense, which he appears to be, how is it a bad thing? They're relying on you not to know history, not to know language, not to know philosophy, and to simply have a rhetorical confusion about what terms mean. And then they weaponize your confusion against you to move you towards certain political ends, i.e. Trump is a racist. That's the entire dialectic just laid out for you right there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean,
So,
well, I mean, I'll go
stop.
ahead. Go ahead.
Let
Go
me
ahead.
stop before I go on. Let me stop before I go ahead. Let me stop. Let me stop.
Okay.
Let me stop.
And folks, just keep in mind, this is the first 20 minutes. This is going to be a really good night. So send it out to your friends. Tell them to get in here because we're going to get into all kinds of stuff. Talking about not understanding history and language. Mitch
Mm.
McConnell, and I got a perfect example of this. And you're, well, yeah, I know, God, the turtle, the cocaine Mitch, whatever you want to call him.
Mhm.
So he's recently announced that he's going to step down as the Republican leader in the Senate. To which my response is, "Thank you, Jesus."
Mm.
But the one reason he's hanging around, he's not retiring because under
Mhm.
Kentucky law, even though there's a Democrat governor, under Kentucky law, you have to name a member of the same party to replace whoever's resigning from Congress. Now, it hasn't been tested in court, but that's law in Kentucky. So strictly speaking, he could step down at any point he wants to under Kentucky law and not be worried about, we're going to give up a seat in the Senate to the opposition party.
Mhm.
Well, one of the reasons that McConnell stated that he's hanging around, even though he's not going to be leader after 2024, is he wants to fight the strain of isolationism that's creeping into the Senate Republican caucus. Now, when he dropped that little pearl of wisdom, which I choke very much as I use those words and to anything Mitch McConnell has to say, I'm sitting here going, oh, and he even went one step further. You're going to love this. He said, yeah, we've got to fight against that strain of Robert Taft isolationism from the 1940s that's infecting the Republican Party right now. I'm like, whoa, Mitch. I may not be the world's best historian, but even I've got the good common sense and the basic education to realize there's a profound difference between we're not going to pay attention to anything going on in the world,
Mhm.
isolationism,
Yes.
versus we're going to be very judicious about what we as a nation choose to get involved in.
Yeah.
That's what that you boil it all down. That's the debate about Ukraine. Because,
Mhm.
for 30 years, there's been a very strong neoconservative, let's just call it broadly what it is, neoconservatism. The
Yeah.
idea that we are supreme in the world, we won the Cold War, therefore we get the right to determine how everybody should act with regard to what we do, not what, okay, you're a sovereign nation, you've been around for centuries, you're a proud people, yada, yada, yada. The
Mhm.
Wolfowitz doctrine, basically,
Mhm.
as was laid out in the early 1990s. And I'm sitting here going, it boggles the mind that politicians in Washington, and part of the reason they can get away with it is most people just don't know. They're too
Yeah.
busy trying to take care of their lives, their families, keep the roof over their head, the food on the table, the bills paid. They don't have the time to get into it the way that you and I do and other people do. But
Yeah.
when I hear stuff like that out of McConnell's mouth, I'm sitting there going, "Shut up! I am so glad you're about to be gone. I
Mhm.
really am." It just
Mhm.
boggles the mind.
Mhm.
Let me. I mentioned there were some topics that I want to get into with you since you're here, and ever since they've been going, I've been like, I have got to get him back on here because we got to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because some of this stuff is near and dear to both of our hearts, as we
Mhm.
both have an appreciation for the academy, broadly
Yeah.
speaking, academics. And I
Yes.
want to start off with just showing you a little clip from Fox News about what was happening up at Columbia, and I want to
Mm.
take off on that. So, folks, do me a favor and check this out.
The university has conducted itself with obstinacy and arrogance, refusing to be flexible on some of our most basic points. That said, we were engaging in good faith negotiations until the administration cut them off under threat of suspension.
So back on your live, we can tell you again, this is kind of just what we're seeing here on the campus at Columbia University. We're supposed to hear from the university's president around 5 o'clock. Now we're hearing that's an hour earlier to try and listen to exactly what their plans are. But I think...
Okay, I want to cut it off right there. That was from
Yeah.
the 29th of April. And
Yeah.
you and I have seen everything that's played out.
Yeah.
Columbia, Harvard, MIT, Cornell, UCLA, USC, all University of Austin, at Texas at Austin, and all across the country. And I mean, I'm gonna give you free reign on this one, dude. I mean, when you start seeing this stuff happen on college campuses over supposedly, and this is my new favorite word in the English language is allegedly over the whole debate about Israel and Hamas and in the Gaza Strip. When you saw all this stuff happening on college campuses, what thoughts started going through your mind?
My God, how much time do you have? I mean, the remaining content that I have planned for this week, including once I get off this interview, I'm going to upload, is in some way tangentially related to these topics. Tangentially, of course. I mean, for the last week, I was much more focused incredibly on these topics, but it's occupying a lot of my headspace because I think we're at a very interesting point in the American political moment. We really are, because if you look at any other period of protest, and I'm just going to start with this, and I'm going to go much deeper.
Sure.
That we've had over the past, I don't know, decade, right? Look at, and I was observing all of this. Look at Freddie Gray. Look at Breonna Taylor. Look at any Trayvon Martin. Look at any of these. I was observing and watching the media during all of these. When Freddie Gray died in Baltimore, 2014, 2015, I believe, around that time, Baltimore burned. When Michael Brown died in Ferguson burned. When Breonna Taylor died, several cities around the nation, they burned. And it was very easy to demarcate who supported who and whose political ideology was involved in that consideration on the basis of what people were saying. The right was largely in opposition to the riots that were going on around Black American cities. The left was saying the riots are the voice of the oppressed and that the system needs to be rectified, or in some cases needs to be abolished in order to ensure minorities are protected. There were so many things going on. It was very easy to demarcate it.
Sure.
You look at the Israel-Palestine situation. It's no longer easy to demarcate someone's ideology from the commentary they have on the situation. Yeah. It's not easy. It's not easy because what has happened is, and I mentioned this a few moments ago, I talked about the aesthetics and the politics of gamemanship. I think Israel has been a big part of the politics of gamemanship insofar as for about 50 or so plus years, ever since its founding, really, in which America had a tangential role and pushed heavily forward diplomatically. It didn't actually establish it, but it pushed heavily forward diplomatically. The American right wing has aligned itself with the preservation of the state of Israel. And for decades, it was just unquestioned. Whenever Hezbollah, whenever Iran, whenever Hamas did anything, it was you support Israel, you endorse Israel, you endorse terrorism. And, I will myself say, up until the beginning of this conflict, I considered myself a full-blown Zionist, a full-blown supporter of the state of Israel, the Jewish homeland, all of that. Over the past 6-7 months, my position has kind of morphed, but it has a lot of the same foundation. So let me just say that before anyone gets ahead of themselves. I support the people of Israel. As an American, the people of Israel have much more in common than me than the people of Gaza, than the people of Iran, than the people of Saudi Arabia, because the people of Israel have actually embraced, by and large, Western values. Now, I know some sophisticate, some pedant in the audience is going to say, well, question, aren't the people of Israel socialists? Okay, here's what you have to understand. Socialism, within the context of Western-based first principles, is different than socialism within the context of Marxist principles or Soviet totalism. Two different things. Because socialism, within the context of Western principles, can only do so much damage. It can only do so much damage. It can still do damage, most certainly, but it's restrained by that cultural ethos. But socialism, when you are within the context of like a Soviet totalism where Joseph Stalin is your source of truth and understanding, it does all kind of damage because it is the only principle. So I can see there are people in Tel Aviv, a lot of secular Jews, who happen to be socialists. but they still have more in common with me as an American than the people in Iran, the people in Saudi Arabia, or other countries do. So on that level, I 100% support the Jewish people. But not only that, I think, and this is only the only time I'm going to really reason collectively here, because historically it is necessary. I think that when your ethnicity or ethno-religion, or however you put it, has been kicked out of almost every country you've been in on the basis of lies and fabrications, and has been hunted by people, has been killed by people, has been genocided by people, it is not too much to ask to have a homeland where you and your people can be safe, can be secure, and have a concrete connection to your cultural heritage. It's not too much to ask that. So on those two levels, I support the Jewish people of Israel. Now, here's the more controversial take. I can support the people of Israel while also recognizing that the Likud party and Netanyahu are doing an enormous amount of damage to both the credibility of Israel, the people of Israel, and the stability in the Middle East. That's just the absolute truth. I hate saying, actually, I don't hate saying, because I never really cared for Netanyahu in the first place. I've always thought, from however long I've observed him, that he caused more problems than he fixed. Now, just let me stop it again. There are some folks who are going to take this criticism as anti-Semitic. It is not. In fact, if I'm anti-Semitic, then the people of Israel are as well, because many of them also criticize Netanyahu. Many of them have been very critical of Netanyahu's policies as well. If you look at the statistics over there. So it's totally fine to support Israel as a people and be critical of the government they have in power. So that's where I stand on that issue. Now, in the relation to America, I don't think America should be supporting any country that lies outside of its borders, which then must necessarily mean it only supports itself. So in that sense, I don't think that support for Israel should be tied to financial contribution. It should not be tied to money and weapons, because I think a nation has a moral obligation to its own people before it has a moral obligation to anybody else. But supporting Israel today in the rhetorical framework concocted by the State Department means that you also support a political program that involves the transferring of funds, weapons, and other kinds of destructive material to Israel. I think that's a false equivalency. I think it's a non sequitur. It does not fall from the premises. And I personally think it's quite insulting to those of us who generally want the Jewish people to be safe, want them to have a good homeland, and want to beat the ravages of anti-Semitism. So that's my position on Israel. Now, I don't want to speak for too long. If you have any interjections, any questions, I can stop there, and I'll move to the protest afterwards.
Well, I mean, here's sort of where I'm at with regard to Israel, Hamas, and then bringing it back to the college campuses.
Mm-hmm.
Much like you, and much because of my upbringing, I support Israel, have always supported Israel, was always taught to support Israel. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of them are religious, part of them are political, mostly, however, religious.
Mm-hmm.
However,
mm-hmm.
my mind started to change with regard to the current government in Israel when they decided to launch off a missile into Syria, dropped it into Damascus, or it wasn't Damascus, it was northern area of Lebanon. And they didn't hit a Syrian target. They hit an Iranian diplomatic outpost. Now, the Israelis never claimed credit for it, but they didn't deny it either. Everybody, who's followed this for even a little while knows Netanyahu's been itching to get something going with the Iranians for the longest time. And that's not just me saying it. I mean, talk to anybody who's observed foreign affairs, and they'll tell you, yeah, he's had a bone to pick with, and perhaps legitimately so. The Iranians are pursuing, according to all reports, a nuclear weapon. In the wrong hands in that government, anything could happen, and all bets are off in the Middle East. To the point the Saudis are scared. Yeah. What? No. Wait. Hang on. In the wrong hands. Now, are the Persians just off the chain enough they do it? I doubt it. They're too cagey for that. They're way too cagey for that. but there are enough people scared to death, the Saudis included. They're like, I do not want to see these guys. Okay, so now getting it back to American college campuses. Here's where I'm at on this. Do I respect the right of any student to free speech? Absolutely. Do I think free speech ought to be a part of the academy, broadly speaking? Absolutely. Is there a place to be able to do that? Sure. Can you be on either side of this and probably make an argument? Yeah, I've got a certain amount of correctness in my position, even though I may not be totally right. Of course. Does that give the right for taking over a college campus like we were seeing back in the 60s in the days of Berkeley? No. Do I think that the police in New York City were absolutely right to go in and restore order? Yeah. My question is, why wasn't the university's administration doing any of that to the point they had to call on the cops? That's where I'm at with it.
I'll address that in a second. Let me address the Iran question very quickly, because I oftentimes don't show my foreign policy interest very much, which I'm in an active attempt to fix that as I continue to learn more and read more about the topic. But so you should expect more of that in the future, hopefully. But from my understanding, here's what I think about this. Think about Iran. Think about the cultural capital is in the Middle East. Think about the religious capital is in the Middle East. Think about the Ayatollah and the strength he wants to project. Think about just Iran in general. And then think about everything they would have to lose by using a nuclear weapon against someone offensively.
Agreed.
Especially when they've already been sanctioned. They've already been hit with almost everything you can hit a country with for their actions in the past, just their rhetoric and some of their behaviors in funding terrorist organizations and things like that. I don't really think, because the entire let's stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, that entire political project was very prominent in the second half of the Obama administration, like the second term. And a lot of people, including like John Kerry, were negotiating for it. They were sanctioning Iran. Obama sent the Stuxnet virus to hit their nuclear facilities and shut them down. So he basically sabotaged a foreign country's infrastructure, which really is an act of war. And in all honesty, it's a war crime. Obama's a war criminal, but he got away with it because the UN said so. I'm not being hyperbolic. He literally said, I don't need Congress or the Senate. I can just go to the UN and NATO. Different story, different day about how internationalism usurps the sovereignty of America. Different story, different day. But the point is this. I don't think Iran is any different having a nuclear weapon than someone like Russia or North Korea is. And I think that the scare about Iran having a nuclear weapon led to not only decades, led to a very long period of geopolitics where the West was convinced that we must hate Iran. They must be our enemy, and we must levy our financial and diplomatic resources to crush them. When in all reality, Iran I think Iran just like Khrushchev, just like Castro. We have the ability to negotiate with these people, but our ideological priors keep us imprisoned to this false binary notion that America and its sphere of the world are virtuous and heroic, and all of our enemies need to be crushed, which then perpetuates the military-industrial conflicts, which then perpetuates diplomatic tyranny in the form of sanctions, which then perpetuates the false us versus them notions. There are a lot of folks in Iran who I'm sure would like to have a different kind of government. There are also many more folks in Iran who are radical Islamists. I recognize both of those factions of people. I get it. But they don't have to be our enemies, though, on a geopolitical level. I can culturally agree that I don't want Iranians coming to America, because I don't. I don't want Iranians. I don't want Saudis. I don't want anyone. I don't want Moroccans. I don't want any of them, because many of them, and I'm just going to be very blunt, many of them are radicalized. They are crazy. Look at England. Look at France. And they to a country, they change the country's culture and they destroy things. So, and that sounds very rude, but I'm just going off of facts here. I don't mind Muslims, but I mind Muslims from the Middle East who are radicalized and who go into countries and try to install Sharia, as they've done in Britain. Anyway, different story, different day. So I don't think that Iran having a nuclear weapon is a bad thing. I think I see it no different. I would rather no country have a nuclear weapon, but I see it no different than North Korea or Russia or any country that we don't like having one of those.
Well, and talking about, you mentioned the people of Iran. Well, I mean, honestly, I'm to the point now. I mean, for decades, it's been rammed down my throat and everybody else's throat. oh, the Russians are this, the Russians are that, the Russians are this,
Yep.
the Iranians are this, the Iranians are that. No, I mean, about every 10 years, an uprising of the Iranian people takes place right around the time of a presidential election. The last time it happened in any seriousness was back
Yep.
during 2009, I want to say it was. And I remember this specifically. The Iranian people were begging the U.S. just give us a word of support, saying we stand with you as opposed to the mullahs that run your government. And we didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And 2019 rolled around again. And, you know, the thing that, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Iran, Ukraine, Russia with regard to the context of the Ukrainian war, or, you know, Iran in the Middle East, you know, the crazy wolves that are going to run around and just tear up the whole Middle East if we don't do anything about them. I'm to the point now, it's like, you know, I'm tired of being propagandized. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this. I'm tired of being propagandized by my government and by my nation's media trying to tell me who I ought to hate. I mean, yeah, I remember Reagan's great speech toward the end of his second term. He was addressing the Congress, talking about one of the treaties he was negotiating with Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. And he said, wouldn't you like to see the day when an American man sits down with a man from the Soviet Union? They're across the table from each other and they're breaking bread. And as opposed to talking about whatever hatreds they have for each other's country, they talk about their families. And then they find out, you know, your family's not that different from my family. I want to see my children have a better life for themselves. And the other man says, yes, I want to see my children have the same thing. And they start to realize the more they talk that, you know, everything they've been told about each other, it just doesn't apply. Now, is it true in some cases? Yeah, you have madmen in every nation of the world, no matter who it is or what form of government they've got. But I'm to the point, and maybe it's just because I'm getting old and cranky, but I'm just getting tired of being told who I ought to hate. It just, and on that note, somebody was, hang on, Gypsy, one of my favorites, who is very well informed on just about any subject. And I got to ask you about this as someone who is a master opponent of free speech. The anti-Semitism bill that went through the House of Representatives. I mean, I got to get your take on this. What were your thoughts when that thing?
The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. So, let me preface something, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
I think the right is really not pointing anyone out, but I think the right in general is really getting this whole thing mixed up. They're getting it mixed up because the significance of the bill has nothing to do with attacking any one group of people.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with the philosophy that has governed American education since the 1840s. And how that philosophy led to eventually state intervention in education. Now, state intervention in education normalized what we now call student loans, normalized public land-grant universities, normalized the research university, and how that whole tradition is the reason why Congress, in the first place, is able to make a bill like the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which Section 5 of that act, it directs the Secretary of the Department of Education to assess the condition of universities on the basis of a definition of anti-Semitism that comes from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which is a biased definition, and then tells the Secretary to report to Congress and conduct administrative actions on the basis of that definition. Now, the entire presupposition of the bill is that the government has the right to manage education. Instead of talking about that, people want to talk about Christians are under attack. Oh my gosh, they control the media. The Jews are everywhere. Oh my gosh. No. And people who say that kind of stuff, I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. They need to shut up. They need to shut the fuck up. I'm sorry, but I'm getting tired. Because we are in a situation right now in this country where there are serious evil people of all backgrounds, of all shades of color, that want to destroy what we have right now and institute something that is more egregious, that is more paternalistic, and that will destroy what we know as America. And they have spent a lot of money. They have spent a lot of incandescent brain energy burning into their efforts to facilitate the destruction of our country. And people want to conjure up invisible enemies in their head because whatever social media influencer told them to do so is speaking in their ear. I oppose the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act because I oppose any and every act of government intervention in education. And I oppose the philosophy that enabled government intervention in education, which is the philosophy of Prussia, the Prussianization of education, which has been happening since the late 1840s and continuing to happen into this very point. It's kind of metamorphosed over the years, is the real problem we are seeing in our college campuses. So no, do I support the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act? Of course I don't. No, of course I don't. But not because I think Christians are under attack, because that was what Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, people who I generally like, by the way, said. I like MTG and Matt Gaetz fine. They serve a very important purpose. But they were like, this is an attack on Christians. No. It's an attack on the ethos of America. And more importantly than that, it's a reflection of a sickness that has taken over America and has been normalized by habit. But no one wants to identify the root of the problem. That's why I did a video on this, and I addressed this exact same point, that Prussianization is the real issue here. So I think that we should be using this as a rallying point to divest government control, talk about divestment, divest government control from American education and return to a model of subsidiarity, which emphasizes local, decentralized based education where no one, not a bureaucrat, not a politician, not a prime minister, not a president, will be able to dictate the minds and the institutions that refine the minds of the American youth. That's my position on it.
It just when the anti-Semitism bill came out, and I saw your video, which by the way, it's just fantastic work. And folks, it is out on Christian's YouTube channel. I mean, check it out. It is an absolutely amazing piece of work. The thought that he puts into this, as with all the videos that you do, and I'm not just saying to blow smoke at you. I mean that in sincerity. But it boggled the mind. I'm sitting here going, so we're gonna use a definition that is so broad. You could literally drive a column of tanks through it. And I could say, for example, we've sat here this evening and criticized the government of Israel as currently constituted, Benjamin Netanyahu, etc. We could be accused of anti-Semitism under this bill if it were law. Because, oh my gosh, you said something unkind about, the Jewish people. I'm like, no, I said something unkind about the political leadership of a particular nation. That doesn't mean I hate the Jewish people. There's a profound difference in those two things. And it just, it just absolutely boggles the mind. And it really does. I mean, this is a question I want to get to you because there's a lot of thoughts I've had as it relates to the campus protests.
Yes, I keep going away from the topic. I'm so sorry.
No. I mean, that's one of the joys of having a conversation with you. We could wind up walking all over the field, and that's perfectly fine by me. There's an old joke. The French are revolting, and it's a play on words, and I'm sure you can see where it's going. Well, you could probably make the same argument about college students on college campuses. The students are protesting. Well, as I'm watching this happen, be it manufactured protest, and there have been reports about, 40 and 45-year-old adults who are not college students who are being paid to lead these things. There was a great piece, matter of fact, I'll pop it up here on the screen just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. There's a great piece in the UK Daily Mail about one of these protest leaders who's, he's the son of a millionaire ad executive living in a brownstone in Brooklyn. Well, it just boggles the mind. But beyond that, I sit there and I look at, academics in general, and I'm sitting here going, years ago, reading about the exchange of letters between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And this was in the early 1800s. And they were both just absolutely sick of American education. They thought it had absolutely devolved down to the point young people knew absolutely nothing. They were getting a terrible education, yada, yada, yada. And I'm sitting there going, oh, fellas, if you think it was bad then, let me fast forward you a couple of 100 years and let you walk around a college campus and get your opinion then. So that kind of leads me to my question. And over on Rumble, before I get to the question, I got to do this. Zippy, thank you for the Rumble rant. I genuinely appreciate it. That's never going to be turned down by yours truly. What, in your opinion, and I'm going to start this broadly, and how you want to handle it's up to you. As you look at the academy at large, and now we've had these protests that bring a shined light down on the state of American education. When you're looking around, watching what's happening, and you consider the state of the academy, what are your general thoughts about where we are as an educated people?
Oh dear. I think we're a society of miseducated people. Miseducated. We've been miseducated. Many of us have. And I'm not just going to blame this on the institutional educational system. I'm also going to blame this on the use of education as a weapon by the propaganda arms of the various aspects of our government. I'm going to blame the fact that the State Department for the past 60, 70 years has been informing all manner of culture, whether it be giving consultation to movie directors in Hollywood, whether it be putting out having a perverse relationship with the corporate media. Back during the Iraq War, what happened was the Pentagon actually hired a very specific set of military generals who were sold to the media networks as independent experts, but in all reality, they were literally propaganda spokesperson to support the American war effort, and they never offered any other views. They were going into CNN, they were going into Fox, they were influencing the minds of the American people to support the Iraq war, to support the surge, which ended up in a lot of innocent soldiers dying, a lot of innocent Iraqis dying. Whether it be, I don't care what it is, whether it be the COINTELPRO program where J. Edgar Hoover decided that the protests that were happening, that some of them were peaceful, some of them were totally genuine, the First Amendment, were just dangerous to the power structure of America, and therefore they needed to be suppressed, so on and so forth. We have been miseducated in this country, and the miseducation of the American people through their movies, through their politics, through their culture has reflected in how they see these issues. And so this miseducation isn't just from some nefarious forces from beyond. This miseducation also has bled down into being from the very people that claim to be the enlightened ones. Because the entire glory of alternative media was the fact that alternative media breaks out of the centralized paradigm of old world media, which means it can't be controlled. Everyone knows this. Well, what people really don't realize is that a lot of the people who are the stars of the alternative media have either been influenced by the miseducated narratives of the American propaganda system, or even worse, they are themselves an agent of the American propaganda system. I won't name names, you guys already know what I'm talking about, but in some instances, this is the case. And so instead of getting a lot of light from these influences people follow, they're actually getting a lot of heat. Let me explain how this works. And I don't want to, I've been accused of monologuing a few times. I don't want to monologue. I just want to make sure I can express these thoughts clearly.
Floor's yours, man. Go for it.
Okay. And so I want to take us back to the idea of information transmission. Let me ask you a question, Brian.
Okay.
In what way do people historically, let's say over the past 30 years, have enjoyed consuming information? In what way?
Newspapers, magazines, if they had the downtime to do it, the evening news, or maybe even the Sunday morning talk show. Yeah.
And when they're trying to blow off steam, what do they like to watch normally over the past 30 years?
If they want to blow off steam, usually in the evenings after they finish dinner, wash the dishes, sit down at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, maybe flip on the television to one of the three major networks, to watch a sitcom or, a variety show or whatever it might be.
Yes, exactly. And I'll even add to that. That gets to what I'm trying to get to. They also like watching trash TV. Yeah. Back in the 90s, Jerry Springer was popular. Remember
Jr. Oh yeah,
Morton Downey Jr. Yeah, the
Yep.
loudmouths. Morton Downey Jr. He kind of was the father of the whole thing. He predated Jerry Springer. Jerry Springer took from him, and I used to be a guilty pleasure watching Morton Downey Jr. reruns. Like I used to do that, guilty pleasure for me. But Morton Downey Jr., all of them. That model, I think, established a culture in America that is kind of unmatched in terms of the impact it had on our view of people. I think that trash TV model really made Americans think badly about themselves. But it also showed that if people are willing to listen to entertainment that appears to have some value to it, because obviously in Jerry Springer, the whole thing isn't just them fighting. It also is Jerry trying to give you a lesson about what you can take from the situation. But it's still mostly just them fighting. If you can blend entertainment and information together, you can have a populace of sheep perpetually, indefinitely. The new age influencers that talk about all these issues, a lot of the big ones, they are simply a product of that infusion of entertainment and information. And they believe, and this is kind of the case, that if they are more entertaining than they are informative, they'll lose an audience. People don't want to hear information, Christian. They want to be entertained. They want to laugh. So what happens? A lot of the enlightened people that have broken the matrix, that are in the zeitgeist, that are fighting the system, are actually a product of a phenomenon the system created to dumb down the mind and control people.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
So please excuse me if I laugh at somebody saying X person, Nick Fuentes has the truth. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Nick Fuentes knows how to entertain you, but he's not going to get anything truthful. Destiny has the truth. No, he doesn't. Destiny knows how to entertain you. He knows how to hold a point. I'll give him that much. And he has a lot of information at his disposal. But is he going to make your life better? Is he going to actually inform you? No, he's not. No, he's not. And by the way, I've debated Destiny before. I debated him for 8 minutes. It was back in 2021 when the beginning of the Ukraine situation. We were on a panel together called the Hippy Dippy panel. It was on Twitch. And I debated him for about 8 minutes back and forth on the Ukraine situation. And I'll provide a link to you, Brian, if you want to watch it one day. Yeah. I think I did pretty well. But what I found from him was that he just kept appealing to the status quo. He just kept appealing to how things are. He kept appealing to just basic things without questioning their validity whatsoever. And there are some things you don't have to question. But if you're going to make a claim, you better make sure your claim is tightened down. You better make sure your claim is refined and reinforced by something more than your sentiment or your popularity. So I think that is what we are seeing right now in terms of going back to the topic of education. People are being miseducated because even the alternative sources of education are actually poisoning their minds by making them entertained and not edifying.
I agree with that. I can absolutely agree with that because, it's one thing to be ignorant. It's another thing to be stupid. Yes. And the tragedy of where we are right now, let's see, what's the old expression? I remember now. I think I remember Paul's expression from one of his letters to the New Testament churches: forever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. We are so educated in this country, and I'm going to say something that's going to sound like a contradiction, but it's true. We're so educated, we're stupid. Yeah, we've studied everything. We've got volumes of books written about it. And if you ask us, how do you tie shoes? We couldn't show you how to do it. We couldn't explain it to you. I've heard the expression, brilliant person, no common sense, or as my dad used to call it, all book learning, no horse sense. That's what we've got right now. We are so smart, we're stupid, and it's like it's worse. It's like you said, it's even worse than that. It's to the point where, we're basically educating a group of stupid people because you can't call it ignorant. Not in the light of the internet in the age in which we find ourselves. We can touch more information in I heard a statistic around the turn of the millennium. The average person today can touch more information in 6 minutes than a person in the Middle Ages could do in 60 years.
Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine how hard those monks who slaved away in the monasteries, who were very educated, who knew Latin. You know how many people know Latin today? Not many people who know Latin. Imagine how hard they had to work.
Oh yeah,
relative to how hard we have to work for the same knowledge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it just, to me, we're not ignorant as an American people. We're just, downright stupid collectively. Now there are noticeable exemptions to that, or examples of people who are not. But if you had to take the American, and I love my countrymen, don't get me wrong, I absolutely do.
Me too.
I'm as patriotic as anybody else, but we're just downright stupid. We really are. Yeah. Unless of course you're from the Bronx, and you happen to be black and you don't know what a computer is, according to Kathy Hochul. I mean, that comment just,
that's all that nonsense. That's all that nonsense.
Oh gosh,
I tend not to feed that. Yeah, I was about to post something about it, but then I said, okay, hold on, Christian. What are you accomplishing by talking about this woman's nonsense? I'm doing a few things. I'm perpetuating. I'm proliferating ignorance by giving more light. Even if it's like a small bit of light, getting more light to what she said. Number two, I'm part of setting a standard where you have to respond to other people's opinions as opposed to thinking for yourself. Those two things have contributed to the decline of the American mind. So why in the world would I want to perpetuate in those things? So yeah, I saw what Kathy Hochul said, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to ignore you because it's not worth my brain power, which is very precious. Everyone's brain power is very precious. We only have a very small amount of it. It's not worth my brain power to go ahead and try to reason with something that is just patently unreasonable. So I just keep on about my day, got my coffee, drank some tea at the night, played some Minecraft. That's how I handle comments like that. Okay. I just don't give them any light because, and this is another thing, a lot of people who want to entertain you, they go for the low-hanging fruit. They'll go for what the blue-haired person on TikTok is saying. They'll go for what the crazy black protester at Ole Miss was doing, and what the frat guys were doing, making monkey noises. They'll go for that when they're trying to entertain you. But if I'm trying to inform you, I'm going to tell you what gives a politician the gall to make statements that are so out of line with reality. If I'm trying to inform you, I'm going to tell you why these protests happen and what the overarching ideas behind them are. Because if you're able to identify it in one instance, I have just given you the ability of universalization, where you can universalize your ability to identify it in one instance and go to 15,000 other instances, and now no one can deceive you. It's all about having no hobgoblins in your mind. That's what Emerson said. Emerson said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. He was talking about things in our thinking that hold us back from our full potential, that allow others, in some sense, to exploit us. Well, you have to destroy your hobgoblins. You have to go pick up a great sword. Maybe go to a wizard and get it blessed or something with some magical power and slay the hobgoblins like Gandalf tried like Gandalf slayed the Troll King, right? In that one Hobbit movie. You have to do that. You have to do that, or else you're going to be thinking mediocrity. Now, let me get to the protest finally, because it's been almost an hour and you've asked me about it twice, and we've just gone on tangents, so I'm sorry about that. So,
no, you're fine.
The protest. The ones getting the attention are I think, giving a incorrect representation of the fullness of the protest. Here's what I mean. So we had Columbia, USC, UCLA, Cal Poly Polytech Humboldt, some ones in Virginia, all of them where violence was happening. In Columbia, Hamilton Hall was taken over. At USC, they had to cancel the graduation. They were occupying the square. At UCLA, we had the situation where they were also occupying the square, and the counter-protesters, the Israeli counter-protesters came and there was a bunch of ruckus. At Cal Poly Humboldt, they literally stormed to an administration building. Then when the police came up and tried to push the students out, the students pushed back against the police. One student took a big water jug and smashed against the police's head, and the police just retreat and they have the building. Cal Poly Humboldt has to cancel classes. So a lot of the more flashy ones, which, by the way, I'll speak about the snippets then in a second. Unfortunately, they have been focused on more than other less bombastic protests that are not as violent and not really as interesting as those. You had several solidarity protests, like there was one in Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, at a few universities there, Lincoln, as well. You had one in Georgia, my old alma mater of Mercer University. You had a solidarity protest there. There was no violence. It was just a bunch of people actually just sitting down in a circle, singing folk songs, "We Shall Not Be Moved," and old Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. Which it was kind of devastating for me to hear them sung in that context. I actually like those groups. I like Peter Singer and Bob Dylan and Phil Oakes and all those people. Even though they were leftists, I kind of like their music. It's kind of nice. But still, you have people singing all these songs. And I'm like, okay, so these people are standing in solidarity with Gaza, but they're literally just playing hippies. Okay, that's fine if you want to. Why aren't these being covered? Because I would dare say, there are probably more of these than there are of the violent ones.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas. What happened in Austin, Texas shouldn't have happened. What happened there should not have happened. Where Governor Greg Abbott deployed jackboots to go ahead and crush the protest there. The protest wasn't even violent, by the way. It wasn't even violent whatsoever.
Yeah.
They just crushed the protest because the governor wanted to virtue signal that he was going to beat anti-Semitism or whatever. When dealing with these things, you have to make sure the ethos of America is preserved, right? Because, by the way, I believe that a lot of people who are protesting have a fundamentally anti-American ethos within them. I believe a lot of people who are protesting are actually, I've called them in my videos, Islamo-leftists. So believe you me, I have no love for most of the protesters. I have no love for the organizations driving the protests, which are another thing I'll address in a second. But I do still think we need in America to give some latitude to people who simply express opinions that may seem unpopular, may be adjacent to some bad people, but in expressing those opinions, they are not themselves being violent. So what happened in Texas was just unreasonable. What happened in Colombia came far too late, because what happened in Colombia is the president tried negotiating with them for over a week. Now, here's my thing. Negotiation is a process of haggling that happens within the context of society. And society occurs in the context of ethics and first principles. Now, if you violate first principles and ethics in the pursuit of being in society, you now fall outside of the bounds of acceptability, and you must be dealt with. How can you negotiate when negotiation presupposes sound ethics? If you are holding buildings hostage, if you are vandalizing buildings, if you are harassing Jewish students, if you are occupying illegally against student handbook rules in the middle of the campus, how in the world can you negotiate when you have violated the principles required for negotiation to be in effect in the first place? There should have been no negotiation. It should have been one warning: you need to get out of the campus or you're going to be arrested. It wasn't that. We had to wait until they invaded Hamilton Hall, until they held several of the staff hostage before the police came in and actually took care of business. That's a travesty. Yeah. It's a tragedy. Yeah. It should never happen. There can be no negotiation with this kind of anti-civilizational barbarism. There can only be force, because that's the only language these people understand. So I think there was a delayed response, unfortunately. And that delayed response is really a product, I think, of a few things. Number one, the universities don't want there to be another Kent State. I appreciate that, by the way, because I've studied Kent State. It's absolutely horrific what happened there. It should have never happened on any American campus. It was uncalled for. And I think what happened at Kent State was actually, like before the shooting in Kent State, the protests actually there were actually very tame. It was not like Columbia. You didn't have people taking over buildings at Kent State University in the 60s as they do at Columbia. So they didn't want another Kent State to happen. But there's another thing. They also didn't want to perjure themselves in the eyes of the many faculty who believe that supporting what they call Palestinian liberation is a necessary precondition of being an enlightened individual and being a good person. When you have these institutions that are bound by these mediocre concepts and that wish to continue to affirm these concepts, even in the face of utter destruction and chaos and the violation of others' rights, you have situations that tend to get out of control. That's what was happening. Over 200 plus faculty of Columbia marched out with the students. That's a problem. That's a crisis that few people are talking about. He quite literally partook in the students violating the student handbook, which means not only you violated the student handbook, you violated the trust that is required for a university campus to even be in effect. But additionally, the students, and I'll close on this, were actively violating the contract between the students in general and the university administration. Because you go to university under the auspices, they will educate you and provide educational value to you, and that presupposes they will maintain an environment that is conducive to education and to getting a good education. But the moment the school refuses to do that because they want to be weak in the face of evil, that's the moment an educational environment is no longer there. The school has violated its oath of trust, and the contract has now been broken, which is why there are lawsuits against Columbia, because you broke that unwritten contract between the student and the administration, and the faculty helped. The faculty helped.
Yep.
There is the crisis on many levels. It's a personal crisis, it's a social crisis, it's an ideological crisis, and it's all reflective of a broader cultural illness that has overtaken the academy and is downstream of Protestantization. So there's much more to be said. There's also the Marxist angle as well. I think that a lot of these groups that have been organizing this are outwardly Marxist, and the students that are doing this, some of them are outwardly Marxist, some of them are Ballast. There's many other angles to talk about, but I don't want to take up everyone's time. But just know, I think in summation, we have to understand that none of this that you're seeing just popped up out of nowhere. It didn't happen in the past 7 years. Even during the good old days, the seeds of this were still germinating. People need to stop having rose-colored glasses. This stuff has been happening for a very long time, and we are just now seeing it blossom into our culture with its hideous face that it's using to afflict all of us with this madness. So that's
I agree with you completely. I mean, I remember back during 2020 and I'll never forget this report. In Dallas, Texas, a U-Haul truck stops, unloads a pallet of bricks on a street corner to no one in particular, just sitting there. About an hour later, here comes a group of rabble-rousers picking up bricks and just throwing them into every window they can. Why? It had been pre-planned. Yeah, it was pre-planned, and they knew what they were doing. And let me ask you broadly, and I'll give you the floor on this. What happens to education at higher education from here? I mean, is this a moment of, okay, everyone realizes that the contract between the administration, the students, parents, the faculty, everything is broken. I mean, have we hit the bottom and then we go up from here somehow, some way? We find some way to improve this, or are we just sinking deeper and deeper into the morass, and higher education, as we've understood it in America over the past 100 years, they ain't no coming back from this. The darkness has overtaken it. And I'll let you have the floor and we'll step off for 1 second.
Yeah. We should have hit the rock bottom. We should have hit rock bottom when affirmative action was approved in the civil rights era. In all honesty, we should have hit the bottom at that point. In all honesty, I mean, to elaborate more on this particular topic, I think that we have taken so much abuse in the course of American education that so many people don't recognize how bad it's been until it just bubbles up and explodes into the form of what we've been seeing over the past maybe like 3 or 4 or so years at universities. I mean, there are people writing all the way back to like as early as the 50s. Like William F. Buckley with God and Man at Yale, talking about how the delusion of academic freedom actually allows academics to subvert the viewpoints of certain students and censor certain viewpoints under the auspices of freedom, and also just to spew out certain ideas that have no real value under the auspices of also freedom as well. We've seen in the book Poisoned Ivy, we see a similar kind of critique happen. I mean, Protestantization has done a big number on the American educational system, and it has made it more focused on the principle of Wissenschaft. The idea of Wissenschaft, according to the architect of the system called Wilhelm von Humboldt, is the idea that education must exist for the sake of education. That means that education is no longer about the pupil and making their mind better, making their understanding of the world better, making their skills better, as it should be, and as it traditionally has been in America for the first, few decades of its founding. It's instead about attuning the pupil to a sense of a social consciousness that and that creates no distinction between their education and the ongoings of society. And then additionally, that makes it so the community becomes concerned with the education of people in society, as opposed to the parents being concerned of the education of the community and society. And so this has been bubbling up for a very, very long time, and it's been happening in very different forms. Obviously, what Bill Buckley writes about in God and Man at Yale is a much more tame version of the ideological aspect of this problem than what we're seeing right now. But this problem did not go away. So Young Americans for Freedom, which was under a different name back in those days. It's why they were established, to fight back against this illness on college campuses back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So I don't think that we have been at the top for a very long time. We've just been sinking deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into quicksand. Is there a way to get out of this? If we take radical steps. And those radical steps are going to make everyone uncomfortable. Well, okay, this is the part where people start accusing me of being a heretic. We need to, okay, this is going to be the easy part. I think that people are going to agree with this. We need to abolish the Department of Education fully. Number one, we didn't need it. Carter had this egalitarian vision, and God bless Carter for having a good heart, but good intentions oftentimes lead to chaos. So no, we need to do that. Now let's go to this. We need to divest all federal funding from private and public universities. What does that mean? That means the abolition of the federal student loan program. That means the abolition of grants and scholarships on the federal level. That means the cessation of all partnerships between aspects of the government, like the defense industry or the medical industry, and universities. And there are all kinds of partnerships that happen. That means the suspension of every single one of those programs. The importance of this is twofold. The first significance of this is the fact that when the government subsidizes something, it also controls it. So that means that if the government is in control of someone who has a particular vision of society, the more hands it has in every pot in society, it can manipulate society to its own ends. So what do? You get the hands out of the pots as much as you can. It would be very easy to say, I think you should create an educational Bill of Rights, where the First Amendment of that Bill of Rights says the government, federal or state, shall have no involvement in the education of the minds of pupils in America. And then every other amendment details how to handle the reality of that in the world absent of that control. That's what we should have. So that's another thing we can do. Get rid of that, all that stuff. And then a second thing we can do, I think, the third thing we can do, I think, we need someone in a position of authority and influence to express just how American education got corrupted by way of the Prussian system. And then we need them, I think, to express additionally how parents and communities can escape it. I think a mass return to homeschooling and a mass return to decentralized schooling, I don't even care if it's called private school. I think that the way the internet is going has dramatically transformed the nature of education. In the next 10 years, you could have ChatGPT teaching you stuff. And by the way, I have a lot of reservations about AI. In fact, I'm actually working on, I'll tease a little bit here. I'm working on a series on my channel about the impact AI is going to have on both the human perception of society, our understanding of reality, and everything like that's going to be a very big series. I've been reading a lot. I've been researching a lot. I've been doing a lot of philosophy on this in my head. So I'm going to be looking at that. So trust me, I'm an AI skeptic. I will forever be an AI skeptic. But in all reality, AI can also do good. AI can also do good. It can do good by fundamentally limiting the barriers to education for many people. Because already, if you have a computer, you can be educated. If you have a computer and an assistant that's interactive, like an AI chatbot, you can be more than educated. You can be hyper educated. And if you take notes and you're diligent, you can be hyper educated. There's so many possibilities. So I think that we need to have a digital model of education going forward that will ride the wave of the future, away from these centralized institutions and systems that are able to control and mold the minds to how they want it to be. And people will say, by the way, this is unrealistic.
Oh,
Always.
there's already one person in chat is like, this is
Oh,
not gonna happen, and
I
I'm
always.
not,
No, no,
you
no,
know.
no, no, no. I get it. I chuckle when I hear this. If you had asked someone in the 1980s when Mac computers were around back then, hey, do you think one day I'm going to be able to access this same computer and talk to someone who's in Germany or Russia right from this thing? They would have told
Mhm.
you, are you out of your mind? This thing can barely load. Look at how clunky it is. Look how big it is. But progress within more limitations produces fruit, right? And the thing is, progress has limits. But if the limits of the progress are realistic, there's no reason not to push for something to happen, right? The status quo will always convince people that something is unrealistic, but that's because your thinking is bound to the status quo and not bound to the principles of realism. So let's be realistic. Is it realistic that education will be revolutionized by AI? It's already being revolutionized by AI. Ask any college professor. They're dealing with a bunch of cheating and plagiarism from AI that's
Oh
becoming
yeah.
incredibly hard to detect. They're dealing with a bunch of people, students doing a lot of things with AI. It's already revolutionizing AI. That's number one. So it's not a stretch to believe that in the context of a social and political project that seeks to harness the AI progress for good, not for evil,
Mhm.
that we can provide education to everybody without the pitfalls of the current institutions that we have right now. So is it never going to happen? It's realistic. It can happen, but it will only happen if the current system is changed. That's why I called it a radical approach. If the
Mhm.
current system remains, Brian, everything I'm saying is just bullshit. It will never happen. If the current system remains, Christian Watson is just some pie in the sky idealist who has no connection with realism. But if we change the system, according to what I'm trying to say we do, this can happen in 5 years. It can happen in 4 years.
Well, here's where I'm at. The system's going to have to change if for no other reason entropy is taking it down.
Yes, always.
The question becomes, do we let this thing, it's like the great debates right now about cultural institutions. For example,
Mm,
um, Disney. Okay.
mm,
I grew up on Disney,
mm.
and if I told my mom and dad, "Hey, I want to go see a movie," oh, what is it? And I said, "Oh, it's the new Disney movie," fill in the blank. If they had the money, like, okay, cool, go. Why? Because nobody had to worry about it. Well, now it's to the point. There's a great debate, be it in whatever circle you want to talk about, cultural, nerd space, wherever. Do we try to preserve this institution and and make it better and fight from the inside to try to save it, or do we just let it go and say, well, it had its run, yada yada yada? I think that's where we are with American education. I mean, at all
Mm,
level, particularly
mm.
at the level of higher education. It's like
Yeah.
everybody recognizes there's something seriously wrong here. I mean,
Mm.
parents are writing checks for multi thousands of dollars every semester. They're
Yes.
watching their child go from being what is in their mind an otherwise normal human being. And
Mm.
they come home after a semester, spout off about 10 minutes of what they just spent 4 months learning. And the parents are sitting there going, I paid for what exactly? This is what my kid has turned into. I think that it's reaching the point something's got to give on American education. Now, it's going to be a nightmare in one sense to try to reform American education, okay? Because you've got so many hands in that stew pot. Too many chefs spoil the stew. Well, we're going to have a lot of chefs trying to throw in a dash of this and a pinch of that.
Of
But I
course.
think something's got to give. Something absolutely
Well,
has to give.
let me address 2 points there.
Okay.
I'll end with the story, but then I'll first start with the institutions. I've done a lot of meditating on institutions over the years. Because I always hear that term. One of the most common terms in political conversation is our institutions. And I ask myself, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because a person can be an institution as well. A person is like an institution simply means that they're very strong, well constituted, and they hold things up. They have a lot of important little gravitas. And I always thought to myself, if we didn't exist in a culture where we were taught to reject the self so much, or we were taught to see the self through the prism of our feelings and not reality. A good example being my truth.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we would have more individuals as institutions as opposed to far distant buildings as institutions.
Right.
See, people don't realize that people say the left has the institutions. Okay. They have structures that call themselves institutions. But those structures are only as good as the people who inhabit them. Why is Disney going down this road? Because Disney is full with a bunch of ideologues who are operating under a specific program they launched within Disney over the past few years to increase representation. The Disney of the 1950s is not the same Disney as it is right now.
No.
Did Disney change? The Disney name didn't change. The people changed. So when folks say our institutions are corrupt, no, people are corrupt. Because an institution is simply the sum of the actions of a bunch of individuals within a certain structure.
Yep.
Now, that then necessitates us to look at people. Because if you ask, how do we fix the institutions, you're really asking, how do we fix people? If we knew the answer to that, we could solve a lot of problems, couldn't we?
Oh, yeah.
You can't fix people. In fact, the idea that you can fix people, I think, has led to a lot of pain and hurt in our culture. It's led to this sort of a rehabilitative philosophy of crime, where violent offenders who destroy and burglarize and kill should be rehabilitated and treated by a social worker and not separated from society permanently as they should be. So we have to be very careful when we talk about institutions. You can be an institution. Now you may say, well, Christian, I'm just one person. It takes one general to command battalions of men beneath him. It takes one president to write executive orders and attune the structure and processes of the government beneath him to his will. You don't have to be. It takes one influencer to speak and then cause weeks of conversation on one issue. You can be an institution, but too many people don't recognize their inner potential, and they want to just have this totally, or their own power, and they want to have this totally externalized view of the world where the institutions are separate from you. That's why the left has the institutions, because you don't have the right idea of the institutions. So that's my point on that. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, or one man can engage in nonviolent resistance and be the leader of the nation of India to take it to independence from the British Empire. One man can give a speech on the Washington Mall saying, I have a dream, and just inspire an entire 2 or 3 generations of people with one of the most famous speeches ever given in history, which lasted 15 minutes. Lincoln can be one president speaking an 8-sentence address, and history remembers every word of it, resounding down to this day.
You get it, Brian. You get it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Thatcher got this too. Reagan got it. They both understood this principle. Yep. I was watching Thatcher last night on Firing Line. She understood this principle so well. She was an institution. Reagan was an institution. Goldwater was an institution. Be your own institution, and then connect with society in that way, and you won't have to worry about the left capturing anything.
Yeah,
that's my point. I like to empower people, because so much you get in this sort of doom and gloom, doomsaying nonsense that happens in the sphere that we're in. All this negativity. Oh, America is doomed. Oh, our country's going to go to hell. Oh, civil war is going to happen. Oh, leftists are going to come kill me. Okay, you're in a bubble that's enabling nihilism within your heart. It's unhealthy for you. It's unhealthy for your friends. It's unhealthy for anyone who has to deal with you in your life. Stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Stop it. Be realistic. Yes, there are bad things that are happening. If you were a European peasant during the Black Death, I promise you would have believed your world was ending. If you were a Japanese citizen during the firebombing of Japan during World War II, before the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you had to believe your world is ending. If you were an American during the Great Depression, you had to believe your world is ending. Hard times are necessary. Pain is a refinement process. Pain is a refinement process for you to be able to reach greatness. Because once you have been through the fire, you can stand tall and not much will daunt you. Not much will hold you down. We have a crisis of willpower in this country, where now we're worried about aggression, even in the smallest forms, microaggressions. That's what that is. A lack of willpower, a lack of resilience, a lack of pain being a nexus towards refinement and victory in your personal life. Now, let me tell you a story before I close here about you mentioned that I maybe want to tell the story about everything going on about the kids being taught in universities things and they're going home to their parents. I was doing a speech. So had to be my senior year of college, I think. I was doing a speech in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was a speech to a group called No Better Friends Corporation. Now, there were some prominent people at this speech. James Lindsay was the headliner. So I came before James Lindsay and one other person. So it was a packed room full of 200 people. I was nervous, incredibly nervous. So I make this speech about my experiences in college, dealing with critical race theory, dealing with wokeism, ideological conformity, dealing with all these things. At the conclusion of my speech, this woman and her husband, this woman could have been my grandmother, and her husband, big burly man, they approached me, and she's crying, she's in tears. Now here's I think 20-year-old Christian, 21-year-old Christian looking at this lady. And she says, I was listening to your speech, and it reminded me of what happened to my daughter. I said, what happened to your daughter? She said, well, throughout life, her and I had a very close relationship. I loved her very much. We were good and everything. But then she went off to college, and she began calling me back, and she began saying, Mom, you're a colonialist. Mom, you're a racist. Mom, you're a hater. And as this lady was talking to me, she couldn't contain the tears in her eyes. They were literally flowing down her face as she was talking to me. This lady could have been my grandmother, who I loved very dearly before she passed 2 years ago. This could have been my grandmother. And she was looking to me, a kid who was still in college, to get some wisdom about what was going on.
Yeah.
That moment was it could have been my grandmother. That moment was so surreal to me. It was surreal. And it reminded me of a few things. Number one, we all have an institution within our hearts. Every one of us. It's not that I'm so smart or whatever. It's that I am passionate and dedicated. And everyone has the ability to have a passion and dedication that takes them to a good place, that puts them in the presence of people who need them. This podcast thing is not a game to me. It's a vocation. It's a calling. It is a commitment. Because there are people trusting you, Brian, people trusting me with their intellectual well-being. We may not have signed up for that. We may not even recognize that. But that's the case. And when you look at it that way, you see the gravity of what's happening right now in our country, especially in American education. Because the education system is not giving people, by and large, what they need.
Right.
So they look for it in other places. They come to us, people like us. And so we have to be very careful with all of this because it's so serious. I've never had a grown woman come up to me and cry like that. And to this day, my heart aches for her. Because how do you do it when your own flesh and blood goes off to graduate school, becomes a pharmacist, and she's like, you're a colonialist, all these, a pharmacist. Not even like a pharmacist. STEM. I thought STEM was free of woke. No, it's not. No. STEM's getting it too. Less than other areas, but it's getting it too. So, I think that we're going to be the solution, Brian. We're the institutions. You and I are the institutions. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I mean, every person right now, and I've told this story on many different live streams, had a conversation with a content creator in a totally different subject matter than you and I would ever touch, although he does have his own political opinions. And we got into the subject of the opinion of corporate media, corporate entertainment about folks like us. And I asked him, I was like, well, what's the general consensus? I said, you follow this world far more than I do. He said, we are the existential threat. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no, think about it. You and I can sit here behind a camera and a microphone, and for a fraction of the money that these people pay out, and have just as much or more influence, and they can't control that. They can't compete. In the end, there's going to come a day when they can't compete with it and they can't control it. You're seeing it now. I mean, I'm seeing examples of alternative, and I use that word broadly, alternative content creators that the mainstream media is reaching out to on different subject matters, talking about, well, and particularly I'm thinking of things like culture, pop culture, television, movies, film, etc., who are reaching out to these supposedly alternative creators. And they're like, hey, would you want to come on my show? I want to talk to you. I want to get your take on something, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, one person can make a profound difference, you know, in their own way, in their own space. And before you know it, you know, we've changed a neighborhood, we've changed a town, we've changed a city, we've changed a state, we've changed a country. Is it going to happen overnight? No.
Never does.
Could it happen over a generation or two? Absolutely. And with that, a brief commercial from my part. My name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. I am joined tonight by commentator and good friend of mine, Mr. Christian Watson. If you're not following him on his YouTube channel and on Twitter, please do so. Give him a sub. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do so. And I want to thank Mr. Zippy over on Rumble for the Rumble rant. Book smarts enslave you to the book and approve professionals and officials. It reinforces the bureaucracy that controls everything. Zippy, thank you very much. I genuinely appreciate that. Let us shift gears for a little bit in the remaining time we've got.
Yeah.
And I've got to get your take on a couple of things.
Yeah.
One of them being the common term, the Trump trials. Now, 3 of them at this point aren't going anywhere. Yesterday, Eileen Cannon, the judge down in Miami, is like, I tell you what, fellas, there's too much going on here for you guys to start this trial on the 20th of May. So we're going to hold off on that. And then you're going to come back in here and explain to me in the next 2 months why you did certain things. We just got a ruling this morning from a Georgia appellate court that they're going to take up the question of whether Fani Willis ought to even be on this case that's going on in Fulton County or not. The D.C. case is being held up right now, pending 2 decisions from the United States Supreme Court, one on the question of the J6 defendants and whether or not they're in violation of a federal law or whether it's been abused against them. And then the other one's the question of presidential immunity, which leaves us with the there's so many words I could use to describe what goes on in Manhattan. A case that is being so misrepresented, so described, so everything. You could write books on what's going on up in New York City. And I mean this from so many different angles, okay? Because you could write a book about judicial abuse. You could write a book about judicial corruption. You could write a book about absence of transparency. You could write a book about any number of factors that's going on here. And I'm sitting here watching this whole thing. And yesterday, with the fact that Stormy Daniels takes the stand and gives, and the irony of what happened yesterday is this to me, and I'll get your take on it here in a second. The irony of it is, she and Michael Cohen are supposedly being billed as the star witnesses of this whole thing. And from everything that I'm hearing, be it on CNN or other places, she may have put a torpedo into the SS Let's Get Trump. I mean, that's how bad it got yesterday. And the reason in part is So Trump's lawyers at the very beginning, before she ever even got in the courtroom, went to the judge and said, Judge Marchand, look, if this case is truly about, election law violation and, misstating of what financial transactions were or are, what their effects are, fine. Then her testimony ought to be limited to, Cohen, how it relates to the charges, etc. He says, yep, you're absolutely right. So she sachets into the courtroom, sits herself down on the stand, and goes into some of the most salacious detail, about what happened between the two of them, the trysts, the tryst, I should say, singular. The counsel for the defense is objecting to their hearts out. Judge is allowing it, and the irony of it is, they get, when they come back from lunch, Marchand is reported to have said, "Well, you folks on the prosecution, I really can't believe that you allowed all this stuff in here." And then he turns to Trump's lawyers and says, "I really can't believe you guys didn't object more than you did. Yeah, I'm just a little shocked. I mean, I tried to do what I could here, but I mean, you guys should have been objecting to this." And counsel for Trump's sitting there going, "What do you mean we should have been objecting to this? We've been objecting to this the whole damn time." Try to get a mistrial. Nope, won't do it. Judge's like, nope, motion denied. Okay. It's not so much the details I want to get your opinion on, but we've been talking about, the various symptoms of the disease. And I guess I want to get your take on the Trump trials as it speaks to where we are as a society. When you're watching, this go on up here, and you're looking at it and you're going, let's see, I remember this stuff in college about rule of law and innocent until proven guilty and fair trial and Bill of Rights and all this. And I'm sitting here watching this go on. I'm like, these two things do not seem to compute. Your thoughts, sir? You got the floor.
Yeah. So first, before I get to the more broader overarching problem, which I'm happy to do, let me talk about this Stormy Daniels lady. So I actually saw a picture of Stormy Daniels as she was walking into the courtroom. She had, I'm not sure you saw it, but she had like this smirk on her face. Like she was just like looking at the camera with one of like the dirtiest looks ever. I won't even try to imitate it because it's just so dirty. And I'm like, okay, this is a lady that knows what she's about to do. About to be mischievous, about to be devious, and she's telling us by her expressions. And obviously that's what she was. I don't think there's any reason for any of us to have that level of information about anyone's sex life, personally. Yeah. And the fact that they thought that was going to do anything, look, I mean, Trump still has the evangelical vote by and large, despite the fact that he has cheated on his wife numerous times, despite the fact that he has talked crazy about women numerous times. I mean, he still has the evangelical vote. Why? Because people understand something, and they understand this more than they have in any other succeeding period of American history. When you assess character assessments in American politics, they're not meant to be held to a religious standard. They're meant to be held to a standard that anyone, regardless of their religion, on the basis of common decency, can accommodate. So it's true that Trump has done some things in the past that are pretty bad. But is Trump out here encouraging cheating on your wife? Is he encouraging watching porn? Is he encouraging, no, he's not. Trump's talking about the nation and how to save the nation and his plans about the nation. So that's the level that he's on. That's the level he should be assessed on. Now, if he's someone like Rick Santorum who talks about character, or you need character, or you need God, okay, then you can assess them on the religious level because they have opened themselves up to that level of scrutiny. But Trump hasn't. And more generally, we should have a secular standard for our candidates in their character. That's how I treat all of that stuff. Now, on to the more interesting, I think, phenomenon going on here. I think all the Trump trials are connected by their absurdity, their invention of legal doctrine, their manipulation of certain legal principles, their ignorance, rather their act of ignoring jurisdiction over certain issues, which is the Bragg case just epitomized. The Trump cases reflect the ascension of this principle called sociological jurisprudence in American politics. I'll explain what this means. So during the Progressive era, you had this very strong sensibility amongst a lot of progressive intellectuals and activists and thinkers, including I'm not sure you would say the great, but Woodrow Wilson, who was obviously a very influential president of the United States. And Woodrow Wilson said in his essay on the study of administration, he said, and I think in the first few pages, that it is time to move beyond the constitutional question about the morality of policy, and it is time to consider the administration of policy. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he meant. Yep. The entire ethos of the progressive era was that we needed to ignore the constitutional debates, ignore the principles underpinning the government, and focus instead on how to best deliver social harmony and justice by way of centralized management and control. They will tell you that. The progressives were very open about this. Now, there's a mistake oftentimes made by people that the progressives are the same ones as today. They're not. In fact, the progressives of that era were actually quite religious. They were actually very anti-communistic. Woodrow Wilson hated communism, which is odd because he was a socialist almost, kind of, in his a lot of his policies. But he hated communism, man. And you would never see someone on the left today speak out against communism so harshly like Wilson did. He hated communism. He hated it with every fiber of his being. So it's important not to equate the progressives of the yesteryear with the progressives of today, but still they have a lot of similarities. So within the same context of prizing administration over principles came the idea of sociological jurisprudence, which basically says that the law should be made and should be decided and made within a context that favors the community. Let me say that again. The idea of sociological jurisprudence was the idea that the law should be made within a context that favors the community. Now, what does this mean? It means a few things. Number one, it means that overarching principles that constrain how the law is applied, understood, no longer apply. You need to look at what's happening in society. Now, if that's the standard for law, what happens in society, social consciousness, as John Dewey put it, then almost certainly you're going to have an evolving and changing understanding of law and an inconsistent application of law as it goes to certain niches. Now, some may say, Christian, consistency is not necessarily good because you can do something consistently bad. Okay, I agree. You shouldn't be blindly consistent. That's what Emerson was pointing out in Self-Reliance. But you should have a consistency, a universality in how you approach matters as sensitive and substantial as the administration of law in a country. The progressive era turned that idea on its head and said, no, the judges need to be connected with the community, and they need to consider that aspect. Okay, well, you do a few things when you do that. You blend the private and the public. No longer is the government separate from society, but still protecting it. It is now a part of society. So now the interests of the government are the interests of society. Well, how do you gauge those? You can't realistically gauge those because the interests of everyone in society are incalculable. So you have to go off of majorities. So now you have literally a rule by majority happening through the auspices, the appearance of a Republican system that in all reality has been rotted from the inside out, and only is there aesthetically, it looks Republican, but it's not Republican, it's something entirely else. Some people have started to say this is anarcho tyranny or whatever. I don't know what it is personally. I don't know what it is. I think it's some weird amalgam of progressive central planning imported from Prussia, the trappings of classical republicanism mixed in with socialism. I think that's what we're in right now. I don't know if we're in anarcho tyranny or whatever the hell they call it. But you have this legal principle that gave rise to what is now colloquially called judicial activism. It has now also given rise to lawfare. If you want to know the roots of lawfare, look no further than sociological jurisprudence. Were there instances of lawfare before that? Of course there was. Lincoln quite literally shut down most of the opposition newspapers in the North before he began his war effort. That was lawfare. Yeah. That was lawfare. That was executive lawfare, but it was still lawfare. During the 40s, there are several instances of lawfare I can point out. FDR had a series of newspaper critics who were critical of his war effort, surveyed by the FBI. He literally told the FBI, go ahead and investigate these people and try to find dirt on them. Now, I don't know if the FBI was honorable back in those days or less honorable or whatever, but they didn't concoct evidence because there was no evidence there. They didn't do it. FDR also tried, of course, to he also used a licensing system to revoke the ability of there was a pastor, I forgot what his name was, but he was a pastor, a priest, anti-Semitic as hell, racist as hell, bad, who spoke to millions of people over the radio in the 40s and was a persistent anti-war. Do you remember him?
I know who you're talking about.
Charles
I cannot think of the
Coughlin.
name.
Pastor Charles Coughlin.
Father
Charles
Coughlin. Yep.
Father
Father
Coughlin. Yes. Yeah, I knew my brain was going to help me today. Father Coughlin. FDR targeted him, not because he was anti-Semitic, but because he was anti-war and revoked his license, censored him. That was lawfare. I can keep going on and on and on. Well, we'll talk about the Kennedys. The Kennedys. Your reaction was funny, Brian. The Kennedys, the lionized family who we worship and praise. The Kennedys engaged in all kinds of lawfare. Bobby Kennedy authorized so many illegal things as Attorney General that it should make your mind spin. I bet his son don't want to talk about that, does he? Anyway, that's a different story, different day. Different day. Bobby Kennedy authorized illegal wiretapping program. I think he actually authorized, the wiretapping at MLK. I think Bobby Kennedy authorized that. I think so.
Yeah, and it was the FBI that carried it out under Hoover.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes. That was lawfare. That was lawfare. COINTELPRO targeting the anti-war movement, the Black Panther movement, targeting all of that was lawfare. That was lawfare. So we've seen the ideological foundation of lawfare with sociological jurisprudence kind of run adjacent to the power politics idea of lawfare, which has been used by the FBI and the CIA and other people to perpetuate kind of control over the American mind. Because I don't want people to think that it's all about principles. There are a lot of people operating in this country that have no principles, and they do things on the basis of political expediency and strategy. They don't give a damn about you or your ideas. They give a damn about what increases their hold on power. So it's not all about principles. But if you want to see the seed that germinated, you have to look at social lot of jurisprudence, because a lot of these judges are acting and prosecutors are acting within a social interest, not a legal interest.
Yep.
Fannie Willis. Okay. Fannie Willis. First of all, you don't. I'm sorry. I laugh when I think about this case.
I laughed for so many different aspects of this case.
I'm sorry.
The case itself is funny by itself. Everything else surrounding it is even more funny.
Fannie Willis. Okay. Let me try to compose myself. I'm sorry, because I just can't. I saw a meme where like Nathan Wade was like doing the questioning, and he was asked a question about her, and he had.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah, you had Marvin Gaye. Let's get it on. Yeah, and then,
oh my Jesus!
Imagery. Yeah, I know the one you're talking about, dude.
Help me, God.
Lord help us all.
Okay. When a meme is closer to reality than the actual situation, that's when it should concern you. Because that actually probably is very close to reality. In fact, I'm sure you don't have your lover take a case he's not qualified for, that no one in his own field can vouch for him in. If you're going to have your lover take a case, which is just nepotism, by the way, but let's say you're going to do it anyway. You shouldn't be. Let's say you're going to do it anyway. At least make sure he's qualified in it, and make sure that his colleagues won't come out and say, hey, Nathan's never tried these cases. Nathan's never even approached the subject before. He's over in this other field of law. Mm-hmm. That shows impropriety and favoritism and all kind of things. Secondly, you need to understand the problem of jurisdiction. Fannie Willis does not have the jurisdiction to prosecute some of the things she's trying to prosecute. That's number two. Number three, you can't. And the entire the Atlanta case is based on this one premise, that you can get inside Donald Trump's head and assume what he believes and how he believes it. Unless Fannie Willis is like that old psychic from the 90s, the hotline psychic from the 90s. Unless she's that.
Miss Cleo, yeah.
Miss Cleo. Unless she's Miss Cleo, I don't think I trust her to tell me what's in Donald Trump's head. And even that, I wouldn't trust her. I definitely wouldn't trust her. Right? That actually might be her next gig if the judge, because it was announced today that the judge might actually Punisher. If he's actually punished, you might want to go be a Miss Cleo down in Atlanta. There's a lot of psychics down there. You can go ahead and get some clientele like that. Just absurd. And I laugh primarily because it's absurd, but also because if I don't laugh, I'm going to cry.
Yeah.
Because a prosecutor is quite literally prosecuting on the basis of social interest, not legal interest, which is a result of a country under the spell of power politics, and a country also under the spell of sociological jurisprudence, which has produced judicial activism. Yeah. So I think that's what the Trump cases represent more generally, and the J6 cases represent that as well, and other cases represent that as well. Assange, Snowden, there are people calling for the execution of both of those men, like execution, taking their lives away. Because both of them exposed the secrets that were happening that shouldn't have been happening. Execution, Brian, permanent.
Yeah.
That's so peculiar to me. That's so. What point do you have to be at in your moral development to want to kill someone for telling the truth? Well, that's a whole. That's an entire show we could talk about. An entire show we could do on that one topic.
you call it moral development. I call it moral devolution.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
You are devolving down into some form of jungle animal when you basically want to kill someone for walking up and looking at you saying,
"Yes,
sir, you are naked." I am not. Boom. You get my point. Going back to the social construct of law, I will never. There were cases when I remember the great jurist Antonin Scalia, who wasn't perfect, but brilliant man.
Brilliant.
He and Stephen Breyer would get into some of the most back and forth in their judicial opinions, because usually they'd more often than not wind up on either side of each other. Yeah. And, here's Scalia. He's quoting law and history and everything else. And you got Stephen Breyer on the other side. He's quoting, polls coming out of Europe and, European jurists. And Scalia was about to go ape in some of these opinions. And he's like, what in the hell are you doing? I don't give a hang about what some European jurist said. I care about what the Constitution says. And this, I mean, go back even further than that. Brandeis, Oliver Wendell Holmes, these men became,
Jesus.
Oh God, yes. Yes.
Jesus. Oliver Wendell Holmes was horrible.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Horrible. And then you furthered on down to Brennan, Warren, the legendary William O. Douglas, who was probably any number of different things. And it's no wonder we are where we are today. And in that vein, and I'll throw one last question out to you. The 2024 election, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to view it. It's kind of like a multifaceted diamond, or depending on how you look at it, an onion that's been sliced way too many ways and making all of us cry already. Laying aside the winner or the loser, laying aside the horse race aspect of it, when you look at what this election means to the American experiment in free government, where do you think we are as we walk up toward this vote, and where do you think we go after it's all said and done?
That's a very big question. Although we've been dealing with big questions tonight, haven't we? All night.
Well, I had to go to the professor. I had to get the professor on here because some of this stuff rolls. I mean, I've got my ideas about where I think where we've got. Basically, here's my take. Now I'll set you up with this.
Yeah.
My take is we are literally at the fork in the road. We've been on one particular path. We got a slight interruption for 4 years, but you can make an argument that we've been on a particular path since the early 2000s. In that,
maybe even before then,
even
post-Soviet collapse. Post-Soviet collapse.
Yeah, post-Soviet collapse. Trump interrupted that and showed the American people, and I'm not saying Trump's perfect. I mean, my support of Trump is probably the same reason that. I'll use a different example this time. People ask the legendary Bob Jones Sr., who was a very famous Christian fundamentalist, why are you supporting Harry Truman? Harry Truman swears like a sailor. And Bob Jones Sr. looked at the reporter and said, yes, but I know who he's swearing at. And that's kind of like where I am with Trump. I know Trump's imperfect. I know Trump screws up a lot of different things. But if you measure it on the whole, okay. I looked at what he accomplished in 3 years for the American worker, for the American Republic, and I'm sitting here going, I weigh it all in the balances. He was good. Then you've got Biden, which is a representation of the past, 40 or 50 years, and we are literally at the fork in the road. We can keep on going the way we're going with Biden, and whatever happens, happens, or we can maybe take a different direction and see where that takes us. So when you're looking at this election, what do you see? Not even the winner or the loser. I'm just talking about just general direction of the country. Where are we going here?
Yeah, what you just said, whatever happens, happens. I'll just short side note that reminded me of that one Leon Russell song, "Anything Can Happen." He collaborated on it with Bruce Hemmings Hornsby, I believe. One of my favorite Leon Russell songs ever. Anyway, a different story, different day. The reason I said it's a big question, because if you had asked me this 5 months ago, I would have 100% told you if Trump loses America, if it's not done, it'll be in a comatose state. If he wins, I'm not sure. I don't think we'll be in a comatose state. I'm not sure how far off we'll be, though. Here's why I say that. He's made a series of judgments that I don't like. He's allegedly, and I know this could be conjecture. We don't know for sure. Only Trump knows who's picking for VP. He's allegedly flirting with Marco Rubio to be his VP.
I've heard that.
Marco Rubio, Gang of Eight. Marco Rubio, Amnesty. Marco Rubio, Warhawk. Marco Rubio, just patently, he wants to create a geopolitical order that is hostile to nations that we could make peace with, like Cuba.
Yeah.
There's no reason why America needs to be at war with, or at a Cold War with Cuba. There's no reason why we need to continue to hate Cuba or its people. The Cuban people have actually enriched our country in more ways than one. They actually tend to be very conservative because they hate communism. So I think there's no reason we need to be at war with Cuba, or to be frank with you, Russia, or any of these other nations. In all honesty, I wish we could just have peace. Anyway, so that if that happens, I have a high level of doubt that Trump will be an effective president, or he'll even make it through a full term. If you pick someone like Rubio. Because someone like Rubio is who people who have an axe to grind with Trump would love to see in power. Rubio doesn't scare anybody except the informed American.
Bingo.
So, but also beyond that morbid situation that could happen, let's talk about the identity of his administration. Who he picks for VP is going to be indicative of who constitutes his administration writ large. Let's look back at 2016.
Okay.
The chief of staff going into the White House was who?
Reince Priebus.
Boom, Reince Priebus. Former RNC chair, Reince Priebus. Connected with all the bigwigs, all these 1,000 politicians. He was a heartbeat from the president, listening to him, controlling his office. A guy who literally stood against everything the Trump brand was about, controlled access to the White House. And that and the Pence choice influenced how the administration was, influenced the rest of the administration. So people say VP doesn't matter. Oh, I'm sorry. VP matters a hell of a lot.
Yes, it does.
So,
in this time especially.
So Noam has unfortunately excluded herself through ineloquence, I think. I think that it was ineloquence. Look, I lived in the South for 12 years. I'm not defending Noam, but I understand wild animals. I understand having to put down wild animals. When I was 14, I used to have a redneck friend. We'll call him James. It wasn't real name, but we'll call him James. That wasn't real name, but that's what we'll call him. And James and I used to go out to the creek. We used to go out to the creek. We used to go walk on the creek, and we used to walk around and everything. And one time, James and I were in the backyard of some neighborhood. I probably shouldn't be telling this story because I get in trouble. But it was like 10 years ago, 11 years ago. So sue me. And it was like an open field. And he's like, Christian. I'm like, what, Chips? And he's like, this looks like a place where a wild hog would come. I'm like, what the hell is a wild hog? I didn't know. I was a 14-year-old black kid from the city. I know what the damn wild hog. What's a wild hog? Is it some that's some wild lady who's like mad at McDonald's missing per or order like, what's a wild hog? He said, no, like a wild hog is something, like a big old pig that is like feral and it can kill you if it gets a hold of you. I'm like, what? I'm like, well, why the fuck are we around this area? Excuse my language. If there's a wild hog, like, are you trying to get me killed? What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you, Jim? And that's what I was thinking. But point is, for that reason, I kind of get the known situation. If you had a restless dog who posed a danger to your kids, what else are you supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know what you're supposed to do. Now, would I ever brag about that? No, we don't brag about it. But because most people who don't live in those kind of areas of the country don't understand.
Right.
I trusted no, in all honesty. I trusted no. I trusted no because if you look at her voting record, she's generally going the issue of privacy, challenging the surveillance state. There are a few areas where she raises red flags. But generally, I trust no. I think that she did a very good job during South Dakota, during South Dakota. I think she was actually one of the quintessential states. So she has shown a commitment to freedom. The problem is no lacks political strategy, lacks tact, and has made some very questionable personal decisions with the men and the alleged affairs and all that drama.
Agreed.
All that drama. Now, and unfortunately, I wish she hadn't made those choices because I think she was like almost at the top of the consideration list. Yeah, I would have trusted no. I would have trusted no because I think that she's enough of a Americanist, I'll say, that people in power might think twice if they tried to hurt Trump if she was a VP. I would have trusted no. Okay, then of course we had Vivek. Okay. Now this one was probably a fever dream, probably a fantasy. Looking at it realistically, I don't think Vivek was ever going to get VP. It's almost certain he will not get it right now.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen. So there's some people that are saying, "Well, he'll get VP." I'm like, "You guys serious?" I mean, stop watching. Look, I love Star Wars as much as the next guy, but you need to live in reality, man. Stop watching that shit because it's misinforming you. Vivek is not going to be VP. There's many reasons not going to be VP. Number one, he's very smart, and he has a lot of shine. There's a lot of spotlight on him. That doesn't go in the Trump White House. Mike Pence did not outshine Trump. He was almost largely a footnote until January 6th.
Yep.
It was a footnote. So Trump wants someone who can submit to his rule. Vivek is not that person. Now, will Vivek be in the administration? Yes. It's my hope that he gets hopefully he gets chief of staff. That's my hope. That's a very powerful position. It's a transitory position, like it always turns over, but it's still very powerful, and he can set the policy agenda. If not chief of staff, maybe attorney general, maybe he can clean up the law enforcement agencies. I don't know. But the fact that Vivek's not going to be VP leaves a massive opening for other people who are not as good or who are just sycophants like Tim Scott. Tim Scott is an absolute embarrassment. I'm sorry.
No, to me, he is embarrassment. He's as bad as Rubio.
Yeah, he offers absolutely nothing. His foreign policy is terrible. His domestic policy is terrible. I mean, I think he said something in policy about affirmative action or something like that. He was very much in support. He absolutely terrible. He's terrible, but he's a sycophant, and I don't trust sycophants because up until a few years ago, he wasn't all crazy about Trump, but now he's at that one rally, I love you so much, President Trump, and that's sycophancy.
Yeah.
And a sycophant always has ulterior motives. So I don't trust Tim Scott. Let's go down the list. J.D. Vance. Now, I told you about how I feel about J.D. Vance. Although I'll say this, I think I would trust J.D. Vance over Rubio, over Tim Scott, or anyone else. I trust J.D. Vance much more. Because I think J.D. Vance is enough removed from the club that he would be an equal, if not even bigger problem for those in the power structure. Now, having said that, the reason I like J.D. Vance is because I like him as a person. I think the Hillbilly Elegy is a beautiful story. Sure. I am inspired by him. I don't like his politics because I think he's a post-liberal, right? And we've talked about this. I think he is someone that believes the American founding is antiquated and we have to move towards a more community-based political order. And that classical liberalism is the reason why all the problems in American society are happening. He's positioned himself within that camp. And I don't think I want someone like that setting the conversation for us as a nation. But having said that, I don't think he's evil. And I would much rather probably have a post-liberal than I would have a Machiavellian or someone whose only language is power and domination and moving up the ladder. So if someone with bad principles versus someone with no principles, what do you pick? Well, I don't like having binary choices, and I normally reject both. But if you like forced me and I had no choice whatsoever, I would pick the person with bad principles, because at least I'm going to be able to argue against them in a manner that is rational and that attacks specific ideologies, as opposed to someone who just likes power. There are a chameleon. You know that Boy George song, Karma Chameleon?
I remember.
One of my favorite songs. They're a chameleon, just like he was talking about. That Boy George was talking about that. He warned us all, by the way. But so Josh Hawley, he doesn't impress me. After J6, he lost a lot of credibility with me.
Yeah.
Lost credibility. I don't think he was as strong as he could have been. I think that he's very performative in a lot of his antics as well. Yeah. I'm not so sure he's the person we need a second-hand pick. So right now, I don't see anybody who would assuage my concerns about that. So Trump has to pick someone good as his VP and then good in his entire administration if he wants me to be fully comfortable with the prospect of a second Trump presidency. Because if he picks a Rubio, America is not going to get any better.
No.
It might actually get worse.
Yeah.
And people will think, well, we got Trump now, so it's going to get better. Really?
No.
The president is only as good as his administration. People forget that, what's it, the 25th? 25th, where they can remove the president? 26th.
Yeah, 26th Amendment. Mm-hmm.
The 26th. That's embarrassing for constitutional conservatives. That's embarrassing for me. Well, the 26th Amendment. Mm-hmm. Right? People forget that. There were talks of Mike Pence in the cabinet invoking the 26th. There were talks of that in the media, remember? There were talks of it.
I remember.
And a turncoat cabinet might very well do that. Think about it. Trump's getting old. He's still there. He's still lucid, but he's getting old. Mm-hmm. Anything can happen. His mental state could deteriorate. Anything can happen. He could be bedbound for a little bit. He could get like a small flu and it bedbound. Anything can happen. And anything can be used as an excuse by the power structure to dethrone him and institute someone else. So they can weaponize the Constitution against him if they really want to. There are just too many risks. So my answer for you right now is that I'm holding my judgment. I'm being cautious, and I'm going to wait to see what he does. If he does things that I think are good and that move his cabinet towards being more pro-America and less susceptible to interference from outside forces, I will be more than excited for a second Trump term. If he does what seems evident and likely, I can't in good conscience stand before you and say, yay, Trump, when his cabinet is poised to destroy America. I can't do that. I'm sorry. I like him, but I won't like the people around him.
I will say this. The choice of Veep this time is probably more important than it's ever been for any number of reasons. But for one aspect, and I'll point this out, and Robert Lowry, one of my regulars, glad to see you, buddy. We've touched on that, but here's my issue. This election is any number of things, but it's one thing in my mind above all else. It's generational. We are at a point where the baby boomers, and let's be honest, that's what Biden and Trump represent. Mm-hmm. The last of the true baby boomers with a shot at the presidency. Okay, what comes up after this is either going to be Gen X or millennials. Who he picks as the Veep is critical for any number of reasons, but one of them is this. You're right. Trump's getting older. He's not going to be on the political scene forever. Who he picks as Veep has the potential, were he to win the presidency in 2024, they've got automatic front runner status. You've got to. I mean, that's just a political reality. They're going to have front runner status going into 28, and if he picks a Rubio or a Tim Scott or an establishment, then okay, everything up to now that he's talked about, and I'm not saying Trump hasn't suffered a lot. He has. What he's gone through this time to get to the presidency is worse than what he went through in 16, and most certainly worse than what he went through in 20. I mean, this time's almost going to be like walking over broken glass or crawling over it, actually. But who he picks is going to be super critical for a generational reason and even an ideological reason, because we are at that true fork in the road. Are we going to be a country that returns to first principles, as you would say it, returns to nationalism, to the judicious use of foreign influence, or are we going to keep on the road we're going on, which is, if someone gets our nose out of joint somewhere around the world, let's go do something about it. Yes. And, waste through our resources, military, monetary, etc., and just basically shrivel ourselves down, as opposed to being a powerful, majestic eagle. We're no better than a cuckoo bird. That's where we're headed here. That's who he picks for Veep is going to be that critical. Christian, this has been an absolute joy and a pleasure. Yeah. Where can people find you on social media? What can they do to support you and help you in your efforts? I gave you the floor.
Yeah, so you can go to Twitter, or X as they call it, and you can go to @officialcwatson. You can go to YouTube and type in Christian Watson Politics. I am on all those platforms. My information is there. And Brian, you have been a great host. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm grateful, and I really think that you are one of the most underrated commentators out there. Seriously, truly, I think you are. Because that. I told you when I first was on the first live stream with you, I told you. You remind me of Rush in so many different ways.
Oh God!
No, you do.
Well,
you do.
That's high praise. I am most certainly not deserving of.
You remind me of Rush. Now, here's the thing I liked about Rush. Okay, because he was very bombastic, man. He had a lot of characteristics that people were like, "Yee." But Rush provided a conscience, an anchor for the conservative movement that was so resoundingly precise. Yet at the same time, so resoundingly substantive that I don't think we've seen it really approached in modern times by any other person. I don't care how big they are. I don't care if they're Ben Shapiro. I don't care who they are. Rush blazed the trail. And behind him came up Glenn Beck, Mark Levin. All the greats arose out of the condition that he birthed. So people can disagree with his antics. People can attack him. Rush was significant. What I think you're doing, I think that you are blazing a trail in your own way, because you are trying to do a kind of commentary based in common sense, based in relatability, and based in what should be known by the public. And there are so many people that are in need of that. In fact, if more people had that, I think that we would be in a much better state as a country. And as the conservative movement undergoes so many changes right now, I think that people like you are going to be a very important part of getting us back to a sane ethos. So believe me when I say that I really appreciate being able to talk to you, and I really am happy to support you.
Well, I genuinely appreciate every kind word you've said, and you are welcome back on the electronic front porch anytime you want it. All you got to do, you've got carte blanche, dude. Give me the word when you want to do it. And it's like, I got something burning on the brain and I want to go talk about it. Brian, what are you doing? Like, give me a day. It's on. We'll have you on. I mean, I count you as a fellow content creator. More importantly, I count you as a friend. I count you, one of the true blessings in my life. And I'm always glad to have you here.
Very kind. Very kind.
And brother, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I can see before it's all said and done. And I'm not just saying this to blow smoke at you. I can just see a lot of great things ahead of you in the days to come. So, don't let your foot off the gas, brother. You got a lot of a mile out there to travel on. I mean it.
Well, I appreciate it.
Folks, we're going to say some proper goodbyes. I want to thank everybody for being here for this session of Chatting on the Porch. I'll be back tomorrow night 7:30 Eastern. We're going to go over some of the news of the day. Thank all you guys for being here. We love every last one of you. Subscribe to Christian's channel. Subscribe to my channel on YouTube and Rumble. Thank you guys ever so much, and you guys have a great night.